The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, D365 Business Central, the cloud ERP everyone is talking about. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. Just a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll be answering questions following the presentation. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Jason Nicolau is a solutions architect at Velocio with industry experience in manufacturing, distribution, and technology. He's operationally focused with a keen eye on continuous process improvement and efficiency. So at this point, Jason, I believe we're ready to transition over to you.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation of Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. As Rebecca said, my name is Jason Nicolau, and we are with Velocio. Velocio is one of the largest Microsoft partners in the United States. In fact, we're one of the largest partners in the world. And the foundation of our success is our client retention. And our client retention is based on our client experience. Our goal is to simplify the journey. And to do that, we need to get that ROI flywheel started as soon as possible. So that you can start realizing a return on your investment in technology. And the way that we do that, and the way that we get that retention, is by gaining a deeper understanding about your organization, about your business, about what makes your business special and the differentiators that you need to retain in order to have continued success. But the real star of the show is Business Central. Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central is a very comprehensive product. The architecture is used by over 140,000 companies worldwide. The presentation today will include just a sample of those functionalities that come right out of the box with the product. We'll take a high-level look at financials and just scratch the surface for job costing today. There will be future webinars that will cover a variety of topics, those other areas of the solution that we're not discussing today, or you can contact us directly in order to get more information. Business Central is quickly becoming the leading cloud-based ERP solution in the market. It also seamlessly integrates with Office 365 and Power BI. Power BI is an intelligence tool that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So our journey today will start with an overview of Business Central. We'll take a look at the role-based architecture, the dashboard, a few other screens in order to understand how the experience can be personalized. From there, we'll jump into financials. And a logical result of financials is the reporting requirements, and that's where the account schedule functionality will be presented. And finally, we'll complete the presentation with a look at Jobs. Jobs is a module inside of Business Central that's designed to manage your projects, a variety of projects, those projects that include the consumption of items or even those purely service-based functions that need to be tracked and all the costing that goes along with it. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to Business Central. And Business Central leverages a role-based architecture that's designed to allow you to personalize the experience. And when I say personalize, that's much different than customize. Customize requires getting into code and changing the way that the solution actually functions. That's not the case with Business Central. There's a variety of tools available that allow you to personalize the experience because you're manipulating the lens. What you see here is the user interface. This is a dashboard for your experience. And the user interface is only one layer. Behind that layer is a set of tables. These tables collect information that may or may not be presented to the user, whether that is to streamline the user's experience or to manage security. Either way, the solution allows the experience to be controlled, to be enhanced, to drive efficiency, and also to make it a more friendly user experience. we're allowed to apply some of our own preferences versus receiving a vanilla user interface that may not fit the way that we like to do business. So what we're seeing here is our Business Central dashboard. And this is the beginning of the role-based architecture. And the reason why I stress the idea of a role-based architecture is because more than just the dashboard can be personalized. More than just this screen can be changed and manipulated in order to show the data that makes sense for you, that makes sense for your particular role. So let's jump into the dashboard. Hopefully you all can see my cursor moving around on the screen. At the top, we see some menu navigation. The menu navigation is designed to house your shortcuts, to house your areas that you commonly visit inside of the solution. For those of you out there that are former NAV users, you may notice that there is no more navigation pane here on the left. And that's because most of that is now stored up here in this menu, the menu options up here at the top. Today's role that I'm starting in is the business manager role. So I'll have access to just about everything inside of the system. So if your role's more focused, if you're say a purchasing agent or an accounting clerk, your role may look different, and we'll look at that as well during the presentation today. So let's jump into the dashboard and take a look at some of the parts. This first part is a very interesting piece because what it is doing is it's collecting information and making it readily available to stakeholders. The solution itself is looking at your data. It's farming the data inside of the database in order to present important highlights. As we scroll through these highlights, you'll see that it's taking a look at different areas. Not only is it financially driven with dollars, but it's also talking about the number of deals, some statistical data that makes sense for us to manage, to keep an eye on, to keep an eye on in order to keep track of our business and build those strategies and make decisions faster. As I move to the right, you'll see new forms that are available, but also commonly used reports, all shortcuts designed to make job functions run smoother, run quicker, to allow you to execute transactions in a much shorter time frame. Scrolling down, there are activity queues. These are dollar-based, these are statistical-based. You may notice this color-coded line here in the center of several of these. These are called queues, and what these queues are designed to do is indicate urgency, indicate priority. And in many previous systems, it's been a struggle to manage those queues because thresholds for your business might be different than thresholds that are set up out of the box. This is a user-based change. There's no coding required in order to change when those color-coded queues change, in order to match your business. In fact, it may be used to match your role. A CFO may not be as concerned about a late payment or a late purchase order if it's only one or two. Their threshold may even be higher than one of their users inside of the solution. Scrolling down further, there are some videos embedded right into the dashboard in order to understand a little bit more about the solution, as well as that getting started menu. We know that when we download a software these days, there's usually some videos that go along with it. And this, if you need to go back and refer to that, that is available right from your dashboard. This donut chart here is drillable. You can get to more information and execute research right from your dashboard. As I scroll down, we'll see some list views. These list views are important because it can track data that's important for your role. Quick visual representations of that data, things like color coding and italics, give you the ability to make them stand out more if need be. And these facts and figures are drillable. We'll use the dashboard here in just a few minutes in order to do research, in order to understand more about our business. Scrolling down further, we can see a portal in the Power BI. And we'll take a deeper dive into that in just a minute as well. So we have a lot to cover, so we will move quickly. So if you have questions, please write them down or put them in the chat box so that we could circle back and make sure to answer those questions for you. One thing I will do from here is I'd like to go ahead and show you how we can switch roles. In many of today's organizations, we wear many hats. And if I need to switch roles, I don't need to log in or log out. I just need to access one of the out-of-the-box role centers that are available. These, of course, can be controlled with security, and they can be controlled by your organization based on the configuration for your particular role. And we can help you walk through all of that during implementation. But what Microsoft has done is built these roles as a foundation. During a typical implementation, these roles are available to be accessed as a starting point. Think of it as a soup starter. In order to create a role or an experience that matches you perfectly, that matches things that you need perfectly. So what would happen in a typical implementation is I would open up the business manager role, and then I would make some changes, and then that becomes Jason's business manager role. So I'm able to personalize without changing code. The functionality is still there. But if I want certain pieces of information in certain places on the screen, I can go ahead and set that up, retain that information, and the next time I access the system, I'll have that same experience. So it's about consistency, repeatability, and efficiency in order to enhance the user experience. Some organizations may require multiple companies or multiple entities, and some users may have to access those multiple companies or entities, and switching between those is just as easy. All you need to do is select which company you'll be working in, and there will be security applied to your username depending on if you have super user rights or some other requirements for the other companies. And for those accounting folks out there, if you need to do some predated transactions, you could do that by changing your work date and executing some activities. That can also be controlled through security by managing who can and can't post during certain accounting periods. So that's how you would be able to change your role inside of Business Central. But let's use the dashboard now. Let's do some more research. Let's look at a day in the life per se. So if I look at my dashboard and I might be curious about one of the numbers, let's say sales orders. Well, I see 4 sales orders. I don't know the dollar amount, but I'd like to learn more about those 4 sales orders. This exposes us to the first example of a list view. This list view here looks and feels like Excel, and you'd expect that from a Microsoft product. It's very user-friendly, and it's organized in a way that is cells and rows and columns, just like in Excel as well. But if you look at this and say, boy, that does not include enough information. I'd like to see more, or maybe it includes too much, I'd like to see less. At a user level, you can personalize this screen. And what you're able to do is add or subtract those fields, change the order, and change the column width as you see fit. And as I look at this section of the screen, I'm able to see all of my options. Remember, I had mentioned that this is the user interface, and the tables are behind the scenes collecting all of that data, all of that information. This is an example of some of that data that may not be on your screen, but is certainly being collected behind the scenes. If I'd like to add something like posting date, it is a drag and drop process. And now posting date will be part of my screen the next time I log in, and I of course can use that right here as well. If I'd like to remove that because I only need it temporarily, I can hide that. Hiding doesn't mean that the system's not collecting the information. It just simply means that I don't need to see it on my particular screen. So now that I've created the experience that I see fit, I might be curious about the facts and figures that are being presented to me. Once again, I'm in a list view page here, and I can see the dollar amounts associated with these particular sales orders. It might be interesting to me to learn more about the particular customer. In order to do that, I can use these fact boxes to the right. These fact boxes include information not only about the sales order, but also about the customer itself. And these green figures to the right are drillable. Let's look at total sales. I'm curious what the entries look like for this customer on the total sales side. Well, now I see some invoices in red. Well, what does that mean? I can highlight my line, and I can show the posted document. This gives me access to the document itself. Now I can see that posted invoice. Here we see a comment. We have some good boilerplate here in order to create that customer experience that we need to in order to maintain our client relationships. If there were documents attached to this particular invoice, those would be housed here. Maybe you would attach a purchase order or proof of delivery or some other piece of information that needs to go along with this invoice. But sometimes our research needs to go further, and simply looking at the posted document is not enough. I may need to see the GL entries that are associated with that particular invoice. And I can do that right from the screen. One more click, and I could see the debits and credits that are related to this particular transaction. The days of keeping a scratch pad next to your computer so that you could get to a certain piece of information, write it down, go back to the main screen, navigate back out somewhere else, use that piece of information to get another piece of information, those days are over. Today, you're able to drill down from the facts and figures on the screen in order to learn more about the situation, to learn more about your client, to learn more about the invoice. And to navigate back to my home screen, I can simply just click escape a few times. I could use the X on the screen, or I can even flip back. I feel like this is changing pages in a book, because if I click here as well, I go back to my main screen. So that's one example of how you could use your dashboard to navigate, to investigate, to understand more about what's happening with your business. Now remember that Power BI portal that I spoke about before. That was all the way down here. Now when I look at this Power BI portal, it's important to remember that I need to use this data. Sure, I could see the shape of the curve, but I can only see little bits and pieces of the data. I can't see the scale. It seems pretty small. That's why Microsoft has created this portal. And this is our first interaction with the Microsoft stack. The Microsoft stack is defined as all of those tools that we use every day. Productivity tools like Word and Excel and your ERP solution. Communication tools like Outlook, Teams, other tools like PowerPoint and Delve. Microsoft is investing large amounts of money in order to integrate all of these tools, in order to connect all of these tools, to create portals so that we can do our job faster, so that we can be quicker and smarter and make better decisions and make quicker decisions without arduous research, without creating large amounts of reports. We're able to do that research right on the screen. I do need to point something else out. If you look at the upper left, this screen points out that I'm in Business Central. But once again, I can't read the scale for Power BI, so I'd like to see more. So I'm going to expand this report so I could see the scale on the left. Some folks might think, oh, well, you need to leave Business Central to get there, or you're going to have to log into Power BI. Well, that's not the case. I'm still in Business Central. I'm simply accessing my Power BI data through this particular portal. And now I could hold my cursor over these particular data points and understand more about what's happening at each one of those intervals. I could see my scale much better. But that still may not be enough. Maybe I need to see more data. Now I could see the table that's driving this chart right here. Now I could see the granular details that are driving the shape of this particular chart. There's also the ability to filter this chart. What used to be a request to IT now is one click, one or two clicks in order to change this view. It used to require potentially writing a whole different report if you'd like to add 2018 data. Maybe you'd like to subtract 2016 data. Either way, all this happens with a few clicks at the user's fingertips so they could see what's happening so that he or she can make those decisions quicker and faster. And I never had to leave Business Central to do it. And once again, to get back to my dashboard, I have the option to close this or simply close that page of the book. And I'm right back where I started on my dashboard. So far, we've been able to navigate into data inside of Business Central through the sales order activity queue, but we've also been able to access Power BI data, an intelligence tool that can combine multiple data sources to present charts and graphs and other usable dashboarding tools to give you information, to present information in a concise way. But what about other tools? What about other areas where the Microsoft stack is in play? Let's look at Outlook, for example. Many of us spend a large amount of time in Outlook. Outlook's an important tool for communication as well as tracking what we're doing. The calendar tool and the reminders tool, as I see a reminder here, very important to make sure that we stay on track and keep track of our activities. But what about connecting that to Business Central? For this example, we'll look at an email. I've sent an email to my sample database, and as I open up my insights, I'm opening up a window to Business Central. Now Business Central can be accessed through a portal inside of Outlook, just like that portal for Power BI. I didn't leave Outlook, but I do have full access to Business Central. This email address is already associated with this customer, so it would make sense to present information about this customer in my Outlook portal. In some situations, I've seen solutions that present data, which is useful about the associated company for this particular email. It's a useful tool. I agree with that. But what about being able to execute transactions? Now I can do research. Now I can see that there's multiple invoices that are creating that graphic, creating that balance of $3,036. If I need to execute a transaction, let's say create a sales quote, I can do that right from the screen. Now what it's doing is Business Central says, I've already associated this email address with this customer, so if you're going to start a quote, I'll pre-populate those fields that I know can be populated with information and streamline the process. From here, I can simply add items, and I'll let my pricing, I can either change pricing here on the screen, or I could let the system price those, which would be, when I say the system, I say Business Central, because this is full access to Business Central. From here, I could send this quote on to the approval process if need be, or I could go ahead and send that by email. I can even make it an order or an invoice right from inside of Outlook. I've never had to leave Outlook, and I'm able to execute those transactions and get to Business Central information all on the same screen, leveraging a pane inside of Outlook. So from here, let's take a deeper dive into some functionalities inside of Business Central. We've seen the Microsoft stack at play in several different areas, and we'll continue to see that as we dive a little bit further into the financials area of Business Central. The first thing I'd like to point out is this magnifying glass. The magnifying glass is our search tool. Think of this as a search engine right inside of your solution. And I typed in the word invoice. Notice I didn't put wild characters at the beginning or at the end. That's because this is a smart search. This is a search engine inside of your solution, because now I'm able to see everything that's related to the word invoice. It's not just those results that start with the word invoice or end with the word invoice. Now I can see all of these other details, whether they're posted or not, whether it's sales or purchase related. I can see those invoices right here on the screen. You'll start to see me use the search tool more often, and the reason why is because it is so powerful that I don't need to use another type of navigation if I don't choose to. So let's take a look at the chart of accounts. Business Central has a very flexible chart of accounts. If you need to bring your current chart of accounts over, then that is certainly possible with Business Central, or if you're going to rebuild it, that's possible as well. When I show you some of these tools today, you might reconsider rebuilding your chart of accounts because the idea of the sub-accounts with sub-accounts may not be required anymore. You could achieve that same level of granularity without creating sub-accounts. And I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. But let's start out with some navigation. Here's just the beginning of the chart of accounts. I might be curious what's driving my checking account balance. So as I look at the ledger entries that are related to my checking account balance, I'll start to develop a picture of what's happening inside of my organization. Scrolling down, I start to see a department code. That's what that says up here in this column. I see a department code starting to be applied on these few payments. Well, a department code is our first example of a dimension. I need to define that a little bit further before we move on with the presentation. A dimension is a tool that creates a tag to transactions so that you can eliminate those sub-accounts, those sub-accounts. Because what it's doing is it's creating that level of granularity inside of the GL, inside of the journals themselves, because of the fact you're getting that tag that goes along with that transaction. Those tags can be applied both manually and automatically. On the manual side, they can be optional, which means that if there's a value there, that's just fine. It'll be managed just like those department codes that we saw earlier. Or it can be required. This means that Business Central will not allow you to post the transaction unless that dimensional value has been completed. And the final way that a dimension can be applied is automatically. And when a dimension is applied automatically, they'll typically be tied to some master data. Things like your customer card. You could classify your customers as to their type of customer, to the size of customer, territory, what kind of products they buy, things like that. But you can also do that on the item card. So you can further classify your transactions to aid in that reporting, to get to that level of granularity without having to get, I'd say, creative inside of your GL, creative inside of your transactions in order to give you that visibility. A few more examples of dimensions would be things like brand, maybe entity, if you have multiple entities inside of your organization. You could have type of sale would be another dimension that could be applied. Project. There's really unlimited possibilities. Anytime that you need to fill in this sentence, I'd like to see profit and loss by, fill in the blank, and that would be a dimensional example. Something like, I'd like to understand my sales by, fill in the blank, and that would be another dimensional example. I'd like to see my sales by customer. I'd like to see my sales by item group. I'd like to see my sales by item category. Whatever it might be, you're able to set that up and get that visibility with the use of dimensions. I'll show you the other side of the T account inside of our chart of accounts, because right now we're at the checking account level. So I can see that office supplies expense. In many organizations, office supplies is a prime example of the need for sub accounts, because somebody wants to see profit and loss by department. Inside of Business Central, you can have multiple office supplies accounts, but you may not need those. Let's look at the ledger entries in relation to the office supplies expense. Here is the other side of that T account. Now we could see those same expenses with the department code attached. So we'll be able to run reports, not only from our account schedules, but we can run reports inside of our GLs if need be, in order to get to this information, in order to see this information in a way that makes sense. So from here, we will take a look at journal entries. Once again, I'll use my search box at the top, and I can see a variety of results from the word journal. I don't know if it's a payment or cash journal. For today's exercise, we'll start out in the general journal. Inside of the general journal, there are a variety of options. You can create batches. Batches are useful so that you can segregate sets of data, so that you can segregate sets of entries. You can do, I've seen some organizations organize this by who's making the entries. I've seen others organize it by month. Either way, the flexibility is there for you to set up your batches in a way that makes sense for your organization. Now, a journal entry line itself, once again, it looks very much like Excel. It's an Excel-based presentation on the list view for the journal entries. So if I look at my document type, I have a variety of options that I could use for my document type that's driving this particular journal entry. From here, I also have a variety of account types and balancing account types in order for me to select so that I can make a journal entry that I need to make in order to complete my activity or task that's in front of me. And there's that department code. I can apply dimensions even though it's a journal entry. So you'll see me use department code on a regular basis, but all those other dimensions are available as well. So if I need to add department code and a vendor dimension or an item dimension or some other dimension, project, whatever it might be, I can apply those at the journal entry level just as easily as I can at the sales order level or any of the other areas inside of Business Central. Now, for those activities that happen on a regular basis, you may need to execute recurring journal entries. And a recurring journal entry can have a fixed amount or a variable amount. Rent is a prime example of one of those entries that are made every month. Hopefully you have an arrangement where you pay the same amount every month when you pay rent. So for this example, we just have rent listed, but you may want to allocate that across those departments that we've been talking about so far. You may use square footage, or it may just be an arbitrary calculation that fits your organization. For this example, we applied a department code of admin, production, and sales, and here's those coordinating percentages that go along with that so that we can get a clearer understanding of applying those expenses. So those expenses are shared across those departments. So when we create a P&L statement by department, it will include things like rent and those other recurring journal entries so that there's not adjustments that need to be made, or I'll call it farming of the data, so that you could get to those pieces of information. Sometimes there might be a recurring payment that is variable. That's an option. And that could also be allocated. This example is allocated differently. Let's say for the month of April, we consumed 24 hours from this particular consulting firm, and the consulting firm expense is going under office supplies. Well, the admin used 4 hours and sales used 20 hours, and we could allocate that appropriately so that that P&L by department is still accurate. So not only could I use a percentage, but I could also use statistical data by like the number of hours that they've used so that it can drive the entry that's made against that particular department. So far we've looked at a general journal entry and a recurring journal entry, and we've shown how the department code can travel with each one of those entries so that we can produce a valid report that gives us that level of granularity to understand what's going on with our organization, to understand if there's a spike in expense for a particular department, or if a particular department needs additional resources or needs some more help because maybe their labor expense is much higher than the rest of the organization. So let's switch gears and take a look at accounts receivable. And to do that, I'm going to flip a few pages back in my book here and go back to my home screen. On my home screen, I can take a look at my overdue sales invoice amount. So these are payments that my client needs to pay, and there's a variety of clients that are listed here, and this bold red tells us that these are late invoices. Well, during conversations with a particular client, it may make sense that they need a little extra time, that we've come up to an agreement, they're a longtime customer and they just had a cash crunch. So we're going to go ahead and give them a break on this particular round of invoices so that they can catch up and we'll continue to do business. Call it a little bit of a goodwill, call it investment into the relationship. Well, that might require a wholesale change. Let's say, for example, that conversation happened with customer 30,000. Here's an invoice for them, here's an invoice, here's an invoice, here's another one, here's another one. Let's say they're a huge customer and we have hundreds of invoices on this list. Well, that might require a wholesale change. And Microsoft understands that. That's why they developed this tool, Edit in Excel. For today's exercise, I'm not going to go into the details, but I'll explain it conceptually. Edit in Excel is a tool that allows me to send this list to Excel. I can make my changes. Those are things like sorting by 30,000, changing my due date on the invoices because we've had that conversation. And then after making those changes, I can publish that information back to Business Central in order to update each one of those invoices in lieu of opening each invoice and making the change on that date. Instead, I could send it to Excel through this tool here, make those changes, and publish it right back to Business Central. That is an out-of-the-box functionality with all of those bridges already built so that you can execute that day one right out of the box as long as your Business Central is connected to your Office 365 account. So from here, let's look at the posted document. Here there's those familiar commands, the show posted document or navigate. But if I look at that posted document, there's another option. If I look at this invoice and my customer says, I don't have a copy, I need another copy of that. No problem. I have my option in the ribbon to send this. I can use my document sending profile to either send it automatically to go through their normal chain of commands, or I could break up that interaction and I could send it right from here to a specific user. Either way, I'm able to execute all of that without having to print it and scan it or send it or save it and then send it to another program. All that can happen right inside of Business Central. And that's because of that connection to the Microsoft stack. We understand that these cross into other categories. Things like an ERP invoice may need to become a PDF. And all that can be accomplished because of the integration with the stack. Another concept that I need to make clear is that inside of Business Central, when you learn how to do one activity, you'll see that many of the other activities are similar. Things like accounts receivable will behave exactly like accounts payable, just the money is going a different direction. So for today's exercise, we'll simply look at the aged accounts receivable report to give you an example of the way that reporting works inside of Business Central. There are a variety of filters that are available that can be applied in order to narrow the results, and also other parameters can be controlled in order to provide the report that you need. This is one of several hundred reports that are available right out of the box, and they're filterable by any field that is included in those particular invoices. You could see that there are a large amount of options, and this does include dimensional data. So if you need to run a dimensional report, you could do that just the same. For this exercise, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the general report for our aged accounts receivable. And what this will do is it essentially gives us totals for those customers. I can see the amount, and I could also see the aging that's related to that particular amount. But that might not be enough. Maybe I want to see more detail. That's also available inside of the same report. So some people might, in some solutions, that might require a whole different report, but not here. We can simply just add detail to our report, and when that report generates, now we could see each one of those invoices that were driving those totals and the aging that goes along with each one of those invoices on a different report. Maybe the customer wants to see this report. You could filter it by a specific customer and send it based on their document sending profile, or simply export it as a PDF and you could send it out that way as well. So there's a variety of methods in order to execute your accounts receivable activities. The other area that I'd like to take a very brief look at would be the accounts payable activities. And that requires us to visit the payment journal. Inside the payment journal, there are two engines that are very important to Business Central. And that is your suggest vendor payment engine and your suggest employee payment engine. Inside of Business Central, they've separated vendors and employees so that when you're running your payables for vendors and employees, you don't have to make each one of your employees a vendor anymore. Now your employees are employees and vendors are vendors. What this engine does is it allows me to suggest vendor payments. This is essentially a robot that's going to look at all of your payables, and based on your settings here, it will create a list of suggestions for payment. Now, these are suggestions, and the more default information you include, the less keystrokes you'll have to do for this process. So if you were to default all of these vendors to say check, all of that would already be populated. And you might be able to run a batch check run so that you don't have to process each one of these payables individually. And one other feature that I need to point out is the fact that I've created the batch, and you can see several vendors are listed. But what if I need to remove a vendor? In the old days, you would have to close the report, rerun the report with some sort of filter that would eliminate, say, vendor 10,000. Not on this screen. Highlight the line, and you can simply delete that line. And now you can continue to batch process. And what you've done is you've simply deleted the suggestion. All the payable information, all the payment terms, all the other details are still being stored and tracked, but now I've told Business Central, for this particular batch, I don't care to pay vendor 10,000. There might be a dispute, maybe a credit due, who knows. Either way, I'm able to remove that from this particular batch. Now I can highlight all of these. I could print my checks. I could also export this list. There's a variety of connections that are out there to connect to banks for those more modern activities, things like ACH and EFT, in order to process your payables in a timely manner. That batch technique that I showed before also can apply to the payment side. If I open up my default or my general batch, here's an existing payment. Well, now if I'd like to apply that entry, I'm able to see the open invoices and apply that entry accordingly. So I have it defaulted here to apply to the oldest first. You can see that 2 are overdue. That's what's driving that red amount. And then I could set my apply to entries and process the payment accordingly. So that is the accounts payable tool at work for us. You have 2, I call them robots, that can be sent out, collect information about your payables, and allow you to make payments accordingly. The next stop on our journey will be reporting. And the out-of-the-box reporting tool is called an account schedule inside of Business Central. The account schedule is designed to produce financial reports. Here we'll see a few examples of those financial reports. Let's take a look at the income statement. On the income statement, you'll see that it's organized to collect information about certain GL accounts. Here we see 2 different ranges that are summed to drive this particular line. As I scroll through, we'll see that my income line uses lines inside of the report. This P1 to P8 corresponds with P1 to P8 here. This Excel-based report building tool is something that you'll learn during the implementation process. This is a tool that's very powerful because it gives you the ability to create reports right inside of Business Central. So let's look at a sample report and what that looks like. Now I'm looking at the overview. And even though I could see my income statement and I could see the income for my organization, I still might be curious about the values. What's driving my income from services? That amount is searchable. So now I could drill into this amount and see those ledger entries that are driving that particular balance. And just like in the other parts of the solution, I can navigate. And now I can see the GL entries that are related to that particular entry. So I could see the debits and credits and which accounts are being impacted for each one of my transactions right from my income statement. And to get back to my income statement, a few escapes back, and I'm right back to my income statement. Now this income statement is a company level look at your profit and loss for a particular year. But remember those dimensions. I talked about, well, how can I see that level of granularity and that profit and loss by department? Well, that means I just need to change my column layout. Now I have information about my 3 departments. And I can use that information to take a deeper dive into my organization. At this point, I can't see any data. That's because I haven't processed anything in the year 2018. That's okay, because I do have the ability to walk through time. If I look at my previous period, 2017, well, now I start to see data. Now I see some entries that were made, and those are also drillable too. So now I can see that my admin has 2x, 3x the expense as my other departments. Either my allocations aren't correct, or there might be some other issue. Either way, I'm able to see that on my income statement right here. And if I need to do some more research, I can do that. And this report gives you the ability to take a look at your organization at a department level, as well as a department level inside of that organization. But you may ask yourself, well, how do I share this information? How do I get this information out to my people? Well, Excel's built right in as well. And you could either create a new Excel document, or you can update an existing document. This is a powerful tool because inside some organizations, they have a master template or a master workbook that's designed to capture this information so that they can look at it with trending and some other details that may not be apparent with this particular tool. So I do have the ability to update an existing document. But let's say you need to share it a different way. You don't want to send an Excel report because that can still be changed. You could still change the cells. Well, maybe I'd like to send it in a different format. To do that, I have the ability to go ahead and simply print it. You might say, well, great, you're just going to use a paper. That's not the case. That print function holds several other functions. I can create a PDF, a Word, or an Excel document. I can even schedule this report right from inside of my account schedule. All these activities used to require customization. Now it's all built into the solution. And with the few minutes we have left, I'd like to take a look at jobs. And that's our project management tool that will give you the ability to track all of those costs that go along with a project. I went back to my home dashboard because I am going to change my role. I'm going to leave my business manager role and become a project manager, and we'll be able to take a look at a different dashboard. As this loads, we'll see different data. We'll see a different format that gives us the ability to keep track of our projects. We'll get rid of those at the top here. Now I can see activities that are related to my particular project. As I scroll down, I can control which jobs are included on my list. The jobs included here drive these charts. These charts are designed to give me a quick visual representation of the status of my projects. I can start to see what's going on with my projects right from my dashboard. All these 4 parts are interconnected. And keep in mind, as I scroll up, we have more of those queues. So if I want to drill into invoices due or other pieces of information, that's available here as well. So let's take a look at the jobs themselves. I can access the jobs right from my dashboard. And what you might notice is my Power BI report is loading. Now I have a Power BI report right on the corner of my screen that's related to each one of these particular jobs. Let's drill into one of the jobs and learn more about that particular job. There's the General Fast tab, which includes the header information, details about the job, who the project manager is, things of that nature. And there's even more data behind there as well. We can certainly have a longer session on jobs, but for this exercise, we're just going to scratch the surface. Jobs are organized with several layers of data. Jobs at the highest level start out with the job itself, the reception area remodel. Inside of that job, there's certain phases, and these are called group tasks. Phase 1 is planning and specs. Phase 2 is demo. Inside of those group tasks are individual tasks that need to be completed. Think of tasks and group tasks as activities. And those can be summed up, as you see on line 1099 here, 1099, and here's the line. These activities will be summed up in order to keep track of what's happening with your project. Now, these are the activities, but it doesn't really tell us how we're going to get the job done, meaning what items are required, what resources are required. If I'd like to see at the project level, I can open up my job planning lines, and here's each one of my tasks and the planning lines that go along with those tasks. Planning lines can either be resources, they could be text, job instructions, or whatnot, but they could also be items. Here we're using up a guest chair in order to complete that remodel. And I could see each one of my resources with various rates and the effort required at each one of those levels. At the user level, you might say, well, that's not incredibly useful for me. I'd like to be able to look at what's involved in the demolition stage. Well, that's okay, because we can certainly show you that as well. As I highlight the demolition stage and I access that activity in the ribbon, I could see just the activities for the demolition stage. Now I know it'll take Tim 30 hours to complete that for me. There's different types of lines that are available. Lines can be budget, billable, or both. A budget line is something that you want to keep track of the costs, whereas billable, something that you will be invoicing your client for. And both budget and billable, we know the answer to that. And as far as the type goes, you can have a resource, which would typically be a person or maybe a piece of equipment. Items would be things that are consumed. We're talking about maybe if you're selling something like a area remodel, it would be the chairs and the table. But there's also expenses. Maybe there's some items that you're consuming for this particular project that are one-time expenses. They don't need to be an inventory item. So you'd simply use the GL account option in order to track that expense. Continuing on the description of the jobs, I also have my posting. Posting can be controlled by job. It's not a universal setting. And what this posting does is it gives you the option to choose which WIP method applies for this particular project. These are options that are available right out of the box. In fact, you can even control how that WIP is being posted. Here we have it set up per job, or you may have it set up per job ledger entry. And last but not least, I'll mention that the WIP process is a two-part process that requires you to calculate WIP, but then it also requires you to post that WIP. And the idea behind it is to give you the ability to track those activities. So when you have you can look at your WIP entries or your WIP GL entries in order to keep an idea of what's happening with your job. And those activities will be tracked here and here, whether they've been posted or they haven't. This, of course, can be all automated so that it happens in the batch process. But for this exercise, I wanted to explain the nuts and bolts so that we'd have a clearer understanding of what happens inside of Business Central in relation to jobs. A few other areas that I would like to explore are in relation to these statistics that are kept about each one of these particular jobs. At the top, we'll see some menu navigation. As I've highlighted job number 10, I could see that I could copy jobs. I could look at statistics. So I will look at the statistics for that particular job. Now I have a screen that's showing me what's happened. Here's what I've budgeted, and here's what I've used. For this particular line, let's say the cost side, I'm curious what I've used so far. That's $677.60. Well, now I can see that I've used up 8 hours of Linda's time at this particular rate, and here's the cost. So you might say, well, where are the ledger entries that go along with that? Could I get to that another way? The answer is absolutely. And you'll get the same version. There's only one version of the truth inside of Business Central because all the information is being kept in one location. So I access this through statistics. If I back to the job list, I could look at ledger entries as well. And we'll see Linda, that same ledger entry that was driving that $677.60. I just skip the statistics page. That's the beauty of the process and the beauty of all this information being written to the table behind the scenes, that no matter how you get there, no matter which route you take to get there, you'll have that same information. You'll get to that same statistics about the job itself. Now, there's also a variety of reports that go along with all of these jobs. You'll see job to actuals, job analysis, planning lines. There's even more reports housed over here at a more general level. So what the idea behind all of this is to give you full visibility into your job, give you the ability to see what's happening and what's been posted and what transactions have been happening against each one of your jobs. Now, please keep in mind that I've only scratched the surface. I've only looked at very high level information about Business Central. There's definitely other areas inside of the solution to meet other needs. Things like manufacturing, things like supply chain are all tracked inside of Business Central. So at this point, I'd like to challenge all of you to think about what's your next. What's around the corner? What does your organization look like tomorrow? What is your organization going to need tomorrow? And how can Velocio help you get there? Thank you for your time today. Rebecca, go ahead and open it up for questions.
Thanks, Jason. So we do have a couple of questions that came in. We saw adding a column field to a view, but we'd also love to see filtering a view. Is that possible?
I'm sorry, Rebecca, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. She said, we saw adding a column or field to a view, but we'd love to also see filtering a view. Is it possible to filter a view?
It is possible to filter views. So the answer is yes. It behaves pretty similar to NAV, it's just a little bit different. And that's something that we could certainly teach you during implementation. Definitely a very important requirement.
Would we be able to use the edit in Excel functionality with custom views, i.e. views with users defined, filter parameters and columns?
That is a complex question, so I'll try to answer it multiple ways. First of all, the answer is that edit in Excel is visible in a large amount of screens. And if it's not, then more than likely the code is there, so we just need to expose it so that you could use it. The other answer to the question is if you have filtered views, if you have different parameters, meaning like the way that your screen is laid out, things like that, then the edit in Excel as it sits today is going to send everything out. So you'll have a pretty long list of columns. And what I mean by everything is everything on that page will be sent out to edit in Excel. So if you've manipulated it to include only 1 or 2 columns or 3 columns or 4 columns, well, unfortunately, the way edit in Excel sits today, it's not going to look that same way when you send it out to Excel. It's going to grab everything. Now, there's always updates happening, and if that's something that's critical for your application, then we could either make that a customization by adding some sort of extension, or we could get that in the hopper with Microsoft, and that could be a potential enhancement down the road. So Microsoft is working on enhancements all the time. So we definitely have to stay sharp as we learn the product and present the product. So to answer your question is that yes, you can have filtered views, but if you remove columns or you've reordered columns, it will not edit to Excel in that same format. It will edit in Excel everything that's included on the page.
Can you tell us a bit more about the timesheets? Also, how well could it interface with ADP?
That's a very common integration with ADP. The ADP integration is typically it's just a flat file transfer, just like we used to do in NAV, but now in Business Central, it just communicates the same way. So that won't be an issue. The other statement was, can you talk about timesheets? Timesheets are out of the box, very basic for Business Central. If you need something more dynamic, we typically go the ISV route, but there is some timesheet tools in there that can be used. I've used it before, and I've certainly tested it before. It's okay, but if you need something dynamic, then we'll have to look at an ISV for you.
Thanks, Jason. That's all of the questions and time we have for today, but I do want to thank everyone for joining. We did record the session. Everyone will be getting a recording tomorrow in an email, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, everyone.